Welcome to Conspiracy Theories and Cover-Ups. I'm your host Ben Carter, and in today's episode we explore one of the most chilling and controversial theories to emerge from the fringes of government secrecy and technological manipulation: Project Blue Beam. Is NASA plotting a staged alien invasion to usher in a new world order? The idea may sound like science fiction, but its supporters claim the groundwork has already been laid through satellites, holograms, psychological warfare, and global surveillance. The roots of Project Blue Beam can be traced back to the early 1990s, a time when the Cold War had just ended and the global balance of power was shifting rapidly. The collapse of the Soviet Union left the United States as the world's sole superpower, but also created a vacuum that raised new questions about control, unity, and the future of global governance. Amid this uncertain backdrop, conspiracy theorists began to suspect that the end of the bipolar world order wasn't an organic shift. It was orchestrated, and that something even more elaborate was waiting on the horizon. During this period, advances in satellite technology, computing power, and psychological research were accelerating at a pace previously unimaginable. The early 90s marked the beginning of the digital age, when mass communication started moving beyond television and print into more interactive and pervasive mediums. Government agencies, including NASA, were expanding their technological reach, and space itself was increasingly viewed not just as a frontier for exploration, but as a platform for domination. Into this environment stepped Serge Monast, a French-Canadian investigative journalist and poet who would become the central figure behind the Project Blue Beam theory. In 1994, Monast published a manifesto-style document outlining a plan he claimed was devised by NASA in collaboration with the United Nations. According to Monast, Project Blue Beam was designed to achieve one overarching goal: the establishment of a new world order through a staged, apocalyptic scenario that would manipulate the global population using cutting-edge technology and psychological operations. Monast described the plan as unfolding in 4 distinct stages. First, engineered earthquakes in key archaeological regions would supposedly uncover new discoveries that discredit all major religions. Second, a massive holographic light show would project realistic images of religious figures, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and others, into the sky, speaking in all languages and merging into a single entity that represents the new God. Third, this image would deliver telepathic messages using low-frequency technology, convincing people it's their deity speaking directly to them. And finally, a staged alien invasion would be simulated using advanced aerial craft and holograms, pushing the world into chaos and forcing humanity to submit to a unified global government. The theory gained traction not because of its details, which were outlandish even by conspiracy standards, but because of the timing. In the early 90s, distrust in government was rising, especially in North America. Incidents like Waco and Ruby Ridge had eroded public confidence in federal authorities. Meanwhile, global institutions like the United Nations were increasingly viewed with suspicion by those who feared the loss of national sovereignty. Against this backdrop, the idea of a grand deception involving religion, extraterrestrials, and global control found fertile ground. Technological shifts also played a role. The introduction of high-definition satellite imagery, experiments with directed energy weapons, and the growth of virtual reality raised legitimate questions about what was technologically possible. If corporations and governments could manipulate images and sound in increasingly convincing ways, it didn't seem entirely beyond belief that the same tools could be used to create false realities on a massive scale. In this cultural and political climate, Project Blue Beam wasn't just dismissed as fringe fantasy. It resonated. It captured fears about invisible power structures, about technology outpacing morality, and about the manipulation of truth itself. Whether one believed it or not, the theory reflected a growing anxiety that the institutions meant to serve the public might one day turn their tools of influence inward, not to inform or protect, but to dominate. Serge Monast remains the most pivotal figure associated with Project Blue Beam. A former journalist with deep suspicions of government and global institutions, Monast claimed to have obtained insider information detailing NASA's covert plan to bring about a new world order through deception on a cosmic scale. While mainstream media dismissed him as a conspiracy theorist, his followers viewed him as a prophet, someone willing to speak dangerous truths at great personal cost. Monast published his ideas in a series of self-distributed pamphlets and gave interviews throughout Canada and Europe, warning of what he believed was an imminent staged alien event. He claimed that a network of satellite systems, some already in orbit and others being prepared, were capable of projecting hyper-realistic holograms across the globe. He alleged that this technology, combined with sophisticated mind control systems developed under black-budget military projects, would be used to simulate not just visual phenomena, but auditory and emotional experiences, targeting the human brain directly. One of the most controversial claims Monast made was that NASA's real mission had little to do with space exploration. Instead, he alleged that it functioned as a cover for a more sinister agenda: to develop and deploy space-based weapons and psychological operations platforms aimed at total global domination. He suggested that the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was initiated under the Reagan administration, was never really about missile defense. Instead, it was the early phase of a long-term plan to control the skies and eventually the human mind. Monast named specific technologies that he believed were being used or developed in secret. These included high-frequency active auroral research program, HAARP, installations that could allegedly manipulate weather and seismic activity, mind-influencing electromagnetic systems, and large-scale holographic projection equipment mounted on satellites and aircraft. Though his claims were never supported by verifiable evidence, many of the programs he mentioned, like HAARP, did exist, adding a layer of perceived legitimacy to his accusations. Another individual often linked to the early propagation of Project Bluebeam ideas is Pierre Junot, a Canadian official whose name Monast invoked, claiming that high-level bureaucrats were aware of and complicit in the project. No substantial evidence ever linked Junot to such plans, but the mention of a real political figure added gravity to Monast's narrative. Monast's sudden and controversial death in 1996, officially due to a heart attack, fueled further speculation. Some of his supporters claimed he had been targeted because he had revealed too much. Adding to the mystery, Monast's colleague reportedly vanished without a trace shortly after the final Bluebeam documents were distributed. As with many conspiracies, the lack of concrete proof became part of the appeal. Followers argued that the very absence of evidence was a sign of how effective the cover-up had been. The more Monast was discredited in public, the more he was revered in conspiracy circles. He became a martyr in the eyes of those who believed the global elite were on the brink of unveiling a manufactured apocalypse. Monast's warnings laid the foundation for what would become one of the most persistent and disturbing conspiracy theories of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. While his claims were extraordinary and at times implausible, they captured a deep fear, one that continues to resonate in a world increasingly shaped by virtual experiences, institutional mistrust, and unseen technological forces. His narrative continues to evolve through the voices of those who've picked up where he left off, spreading the idea that somewhere, powerful forces are preparing to stage the ultimate deception. The most compelling aspects of Project Bluebeam lie in the claims surrounding the technology itself, specifically the tools allegedly capable of projecting massive lifelike holograms into the sky and manipulating the minds of entire populations. According to proponents of the theory, the groundwork for this technology has not only been laid over decades, but is already being quietly deployed through a combination of space-based assets, electromagnetic weapons, and psychological warfare systems. One of the central claims is that NASA, in partnership with other military and intelligence agencies, has developed holographic projection systems capable of creating three-dimensional images large enough to appear in the sky above entire cities. These visuals, believers say, are not simple light displays, but hyper-realistic images indistinguishable from reality. Deities, spaceships, or celestial phenomena designed to provoke awe, fear, and confusion. These projections, when combined with precisely targeted audio signals, would create the illusion of divine communication or extraterrestrial contact. People would hear voices in their own languages, even believe they were receiving messages telepathically. Supporters of the theory often point to specific technologies to support these claims. One example frequently cited is voice-to-skull, or V2K technology, a real concept explored by military researchers involving directed microwave signals that can be perceived as sound within a person's head. While documented as a theoretical possibility in defense literature, the idea that it could be used to deliver tailored messages en masse to millions of people is unproven. Still, in conspiracy circles, this type of technology is considered a key component of Bluebeam's second stage, creating the illusion of a divine presence communicating directly with individuals. Another major element involves satellite infrastructure. Proponents argue that satellite constellations like Starlink are not just for internet access, but could serve dual purposes, supporting real-time holographic projection and electromagnetic manipulation. The belief is that by using satellites to triangulate beams and energy patterns, these systems could simultaneously create visual illusions in the sky and emotional or cognitive disruptions in the population below. Earthquakes, storms, or mass hallucinations could be induced through coordinated electromagnetic fields, laying the psychological groundwork for submission to a new world order. The fourth and most alarming claim within the Bluebeam framework is the staged alien invasion. Here, believers contend that holographic projections of massive spacecraft, alongside real manned aircraft built to resemble UFOs, would descend over major cities. Governments around the world acting in coordination would declare a state of emergency. In the ensuing chaos, a unified global leadership structure would be introduced under the guise of planetary defense. National sovereignty would be dissolved, military forces consolidated, and surveillance powers expanded under the justification of protecting humanity from an external threat. This simulated invasion, they argue, would serve as the ultimate false flag, terrifying populations into surrendering freedoms and aligning with a pre-established global governance system. Documents often cited in support of these claims include declassified military proposals and patents related to psychological warfare, directed energy weapons, and non-lethal crowd control technologies. Though none explicitly describe Project Bluebeam, conspiracy theorists view these fragments as pieces of a hidden puzzle. To believers, these claims are not merely speculative. They represent a slow-drip rollout of capabilities that will culminate in a grand, manipulative event. Whether it's through visual spectacle, synthetic telepathy, or crisis-induced compliance, they argue that the tools to reprogram society are already in place, awaiting only the moment when the illusion becomes real. Evaluating the validity of the claims surrounding Project Bluebeam requires a deep dive into the scientific and technological realities underpinning them. While the theory presents a chilling narrative of manipulation through holograms, satellites, and psychological warfare, much of the supporting evidence rests on loose associations, misunderstood patents, and speculative leaps rather than verified data. Still, that hasn't stopped proponents from drawing connections between real-world technologies and the theoretical framework Monast described. Holographic projection stands at the center of the theory, but the capabilities described exceed what modern science can demonstrably achieve. The idea of projecting massive three-dimensional images into the sky, visible from all angles, is not supported by current optical physics. Real-world holography, while impressive, requires a controlled environment and specific light conditions to create visible, stable images. Some experimental techniques using lasers and atmospheric particles have produced fleeting illusions under narrow conditions, but the idea of projecting convincing, interactive religious figures into the open sky above millions is, at least with current technology, far beyond what's been shown publicly. Patents often cited by believers do exist, and they are genuine. There are patents for technologies that use lasers, plasma, or ionized air to create luminous shapes, as well as patents for devices that transmit sound using microwave frequencies perceived inside the human skull. However, a patent's existence does not confirm its functionality or deployment. Many patents are speculative, defensive, or never make it past the prototype stage. Conflating these with fully functioning systems often leads to inflated expectations about what these technologies can actually do. One of the more frequently mentioned real-world projects is HAARP, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program based in Alaska. Though its stated purpose is the study of the ionosphere for communications and surveillance applications, HAARP has long been a lightning rod for conspiracy theorists. Some believe it can manipulate weather, trigger earthquakes, or even affect human consciousness by altering electromagnetic fields. In the context of Blue Beam, HAARP is often cited as a key component of the staged global crises or the mind control aspect of the program. Scientific studies, however, have consistently dismissed these claims, noting that HAARP's capabilities, while powerful within a narrow scope, are nowhere near the scale alleged. As for the claim that satellites like Starlink could form a planetary-scale projection or mind control network, this too lacks technical substantiation. Starlink's primary function is global internet coverage, and its satellites are small, low-power units not designed for energy projection. The bandwidth and power requirements to broadcast global-scale audiovisual illusions or psychological triggers would be orders of magnitude beyond their capacity. Still, there is enough overlap between speculative defense technologies and Blue Beam's theoretical components to maintain its mystique. Directed energy weapons, crowd control systems like LRADs, long-range acoustic devices, and psychological operations manuals developed by military organizations are real and well documented. These are tools designed to influence, distract, or suppress populations under specific conditions. While their existence doesn't confirm Blue Beam, it adds just enough credibility for those predisposed to distrust official narratives. In truth, Project Blue Beam thrives in ambiguity. The blend of real science, emerging technology, and unverifiable claims makes it difficult to prove or disprove definitively. This very quality, the blurred boundary between what is known and what is merely possible, keeps the theory alive, evolving, and endlessly adaptable to new events, inventions, and global shifts. It is this fusion of fact and speculation that allows Blue Beam to exist in a permanent grey zone, a conspiracy that can never be confirmed, yet never completely dismissed. Despite the persistent belief in Project Blue Beam among conspiracy theorists, mainstream experts from the fields of science, technology, and defense are largely unified in their skepticism. Their arguments don't simply rest on a blanket dismissal of the claims. They are grounded in technical limitations, logical inconsistencies, and a broader understanding of how large-scale operations actually function in the real world. From a logistical, scientific, and psychological standpoint, critics argue that the theory collapses under scrutiny. Holography, for instance, is a field with well-defined limitations. Experts in optics and photonics explain that large-scale holographic projection into open air, particularly over massive regions or entire continents, would require a level of energy, atmospheric control, and precision far beyond anything publicly or even militarily available. Atmospheric diffusion, curvature of the Earth, and environmental factors like humidity and pollution make clean, sustained image projection virtually impossible without a medium like fog, glass, or water vapor to carry and reflect light consistently. The grand visuals described in Blue Beam theory, religious figures visible to everyone on Earth at once, are considered physically unfeasible given current technologies. On the audio front, the microwave auditory effect, also known as the Fry effect, has been documented, but only in very controlled settings. The effect causes a person to perceive clicking or buzzing noises due to pulsed microwave signals. While it is theoretically possible to deliver audible content using this phenomenon, the limitations are severe: short range, narrow targeting, and limited intelligibility. The idea of globally transmitting complex language-specific telepathic messages via this method is seen as scientifically implausible. Beyond the technical doubts, there's also the human factor. Experts in military logistics and organizational behavior emphasize the sheer scale of secrecy that a project like Blue Beam would require. To fake an alien invasion or simulate the second coming of Christ on a global scale would necessitate coordination among thousands, if not millions of individuals across national governments, intelligence agencies, scientific institutions, and private corporations. Such a massive conspiracy would have to operate without whistleblowers, without documentation leaks, and without a single technical failure visible to the public. This level of airtight control is virtually unheard of in any known government operation, especially in an era dominated by smartphones, leaks, and independent journalism. Psychologists and sociologists also weigh in with a different angle. They argue that the blue beam theory is not just a fear of technology, but a projection of deeper anxieties about control, belief, and identity. In their view, theories like this flourish in uncertain times, when faith in institutions wanes and the speed of technological change outpaces the average person's understanding. The human mind tends to seek patterns, causes, and hidden meaning in chaos, particularly during social or political upheaval. The more complex and frightening the world becomes, the more appealing it is to believe that a hidden force is orchestrating the confusion. Critics also point out inconsistencies in the theory's structure. If the goal is to create a unified global religion and government, why would the orchestrators use fear and deception as their methods? Wouldn't such trauma create mass resistance rather than compliance? These questions expose the paradox at the heart of Blue Beam. The theory depends on a seamless global deception executed flawlessly by institutions that, in nearly every other context, are accused of corruption, incompetence, or infighting. Ultimately, skepticism doesn't arise from a refusal to consider conspiracies. It emerges from the absence of concrete, reproducible evidence and the logical flaws embedded in the theory's design. Critics argue that the power of Blue Beam lies not in its realism, but in its narrative pull. It tells a captivating story of cosmic betrayal, one that thrives not in the presence of proof, but in the seductive space between paranoia and possibility. The broader implications of the Project Blue Beam conspiracy reach far beyond the question of whether NASA is planning a staged alien invasion. At its core, the theory reflects a deeper societal unease, an anxiety about power, perception, and the fragility of shared reality. If Blue Beam's fundamental premise is to be taken seriously, that institutions could fabricate a global crisis so convincingly that people willingly surrender their freedoms, then it speaks volumes about how vulnerable public trust has become in the modern age. In a world where real-time information is broadcast globally and attention spans are increasingly fragmented, the idea of manufactured consensus carries an ominous resonance. The fear that large segments of society could be manipulated en masse, not just by physical force but through technological illusion, is no longer restricted to the realm of science fiction. Even without holograms in the sky or artificial voices in people's heads, control through perception has become an accepted feature of contemporary life, shaped by curated media narratives, behavioral algorithms, and mass surveillance. The implications here are psychological as much as political. Blue Beam presents a scenario in which belief itself becomes a tool of domination. Religious faith, cultural identity, and even sensory experience are shown as programmable. This speaks to a profound concern in the modern world, that what people hold sacred, whether spiritual or social, can be engineered and overwritten by those with the right tools. In such a scenario, resistance becomes difficult not because of oppression, but because the very framework through which people understand reality has been tampered with. Politically, the theory implies a deep erosion of national sovereignty and local governance. Blue Beam doesn't merely posit a manipulative event, it imagines the complete reorganization of global power. Governments dissolve into a unified world authority, justified by the manufactured appearance of a crisis too large for any one nation to handle. For those already skeptical of globalist institutions like the United Nations or World Economic Forum, this hypothetical event serves as the ultimate confirmation of their fears. It transforms abstract anxieties about technocratic control into a detailed, nightmarish script. The cultural implications are no less significant. Blue Beam essentially weaponizes storytelling on a planetary scale. By turning myth and religion into tools of control, it reflects a belief that even the deepest human convictions can be commodified. This resonates in a time when entertainment, politics, and identity increasingly overlap, and when the line between reality and narrative is often blurred. If the theory's predictions were realized, it would mark a new era in which not just news, but spiritual experience itself becomes synthetic. There's also an underlying message about humanity's vulnerability to spectacle. The blue beam scenario assumes that people, when confronted with overwhelming visual and emotional stimuli, will default to obedience. It suggests that society's relationship to truth is so fragile that it can be broken with a convincing enough illusion. Whether or not such technology exists, the fear that people can be guided en masse by images and sound, by the appearance of something real, has deep cultural resonance in an age saturated with media, disinformation, and curated perception. Ultimately, the broader impact of blue beam as a theory lies not in its factual foundation, but in its symbolic power. It's a modern myth for a digital age, one that reflects a collective anxiety about the loss of autonomy, the rise of invisible power structures, and the possibility that reality itself is no longer within the grasp of those who live it. The story endures because it resonates on multiple levels: technological, emotional, spiritual, and existential. Whether or not it's true almost becomes secondary to the fact that, in the eyes of its believers, it could be, and that possibility alone is enough to change how people see the world. Project Bluebeam's influence on modern society and media narratives is not limited to fringe circles or underground forums. Over the past 2 decades, its core ideas have quietly infiltrated mainstream entertainment, political discourse, and the broader cultural imagination. The theory's elements, manufactured crises, high-tech illusions, staged celestial events, and global psychological manipulation have become thematic pillars in films, television, and digital storytelling. These motifs are now so common that for many, Bluebeam no longer feels like a theory at all, but a kind of template for dystopian fiction and speculative futurism. Hollywood has played a significant role in this normalization. Movies like Independence Day, War of the Worlds, and Spider-Man: Far From Home have all featured staged alien invasions or fake apocalyptic events engineered by human hands. These narratives often follow the exact logic outlined in Bluebeam. The public is duped by an overwhelming spectacle, order collapses, and a new power rises in the chaos. Even more grounded dramas and science fiction shows, such as Black Mirror or The Man in the High Castle, explore themes of mass illusion, alternate realities, and state-sponsored deception, reinforcing cultural assumptions that what we see and hear may not be real. This recurring presence of Bluebeam-like storylines has a feedback effect. As the media recycles these motifs, it conditions audiences to accept the possibility of manipulation on a massive scale. It also gives believers more ammunition. When art imitates conspiracy theorists often claim validation. They interpret fiction not as coincidence but as predictive programming, a concept suggesting that governments and media industries subtly expose people to future agendas through entertainment. In their view, the widespread portrayal of fake alien invasions or messianic returns is no accident. It's psychological preparation. Social media has only accelerated this phenomenon. Platforms like YouTube and TikTok are filled with short-form content discussing Project Bluebeam, often blending real footage of unusual sky phenomena, unexplained military exercises, or strange religious imagery with ominous narration and glitchy sound design. These videos don't require evidence. They rely on mood, ambiguity, and rapid emotional engagement. And in a digital environment where algorithms reward sensationalism, Bluebeam content spreads quickly, feeding on uncertainty and distrust. Meanwhile, political discourse increasingly mirrors some of the project's core ideas. Leaders and pundits regularly accuse each other of orchestrating false flags, manipulating perception, or staging crises for political gain. Whether discussing public health emergencies, natural disasters, or economic upheavals, the language of control and deception has become common. While these claims may not reference Bluebeam directly, they echo its logic, suggesting that powerful institutions are capable of fabricating entire realities to justify their agenda. The cultural impact extends beyond media into grassroots belief systems. Among certain religious communities, Bluebeam is interpreted as an antichrist deception, a literal fulfillment of end-times prophecy disguised as technological marvel. For others, particularly within anti-globalist or libertarian circles, it serves as a warning against centralized power and mass surveillance. Across these diverse belief systems, Blue Beam operates less like a theory and more like a symbolic framework, a way to explain a world that feels increasingly constructed, managed, and unreal. What makes Project Blue Beam so pervasive is not its proof, but its adaptability. It can be applied to almost any event, whether it's a UFO sighting, a viral video of a strange light in the sky, or a sudden international crisis. In doing so, it reinforces the idea that nothing is as it seems, and that all major developments might serve a hidden agenda. This worldview, once limited to the fringes, has moved closer to the center of how many interpret the news, entertainment, and even personal experience. Blue Beam has become not just a theory, but a lens, distorting the line between manipulation and reality in a world already saturated with illusion. Among the most speculative and fringe dimensions of the Project Blue Beam theory are those that extend beyond geopolitical manipulation and into the realms of metaphysics, esoteric science, and interdimensional warfare. While the core narrative centers on technological illusion and global control, a growing faction of believers interpret Blue Beam not just as a plan for dominance, but as a spiritual deception orchestrated by forces beyond the physical world, entities that seek not just to control humanity, but to fundamentally reshape its destiny. Some interpretations borrow heavily from Christian eschatology, casting the projected Messiah of Blue Beam's second phase as a literal Antichrist figure. In this view, the orchestrated religious holograms are not merely tools of psychological manipulation, but the technological incarnation of satanic deception prophesied in biblical texts. Passages from the Book of Revelation are frequently cited alongside Blue Beam rhetoric, particularly those referencing signs and wonders in the sky, false prophets, and the unification of global belief systems. This strain of interpretation treats the theory not as political speculation, but as a fulfillment of divine warning, a final act in the cosmic battle between good and evil. Other fringe perspectives step outside traditional religion altogether and suggest that the deception is being guided or influenced by non-human intelligences, either extraterrestrial or interdimensional. Some theorists claim that Blue Beam is not merely a human-engineered plot, but part of a larger cosmic agenda involving advanced beings who have been interacting with Earth for millennia. These beings, according to this interpretation, use deception as a form of spiritual harvesting, manipulating humanity's perception of divinity to siphon belief, energy, or consciousness. The staged alien invasion, in this view, is not just a ruse for political control, but a ritual of planetary scale meant to sever humanity from its true origins. Still more radical ideas suggest that the very reality we inhabit is malleable, that through the use of technology, consciousness can be artificially reprogrammed, and that Project Blue Beam is the first step in reshaping not just society, but the structure of human awareness itself. This view, informed by ideas from quantum theory and simulation hypothesis, proposes that advanced technologies can overwrite perception at such a granular level that individuals no longer distinguish between inner experience and external reality. The projected deity or alien ship becomes not just a trick of the eye, but a full sensory immersion, an engineered hallucination indistinguishable from truth. Within these fringe views, time and space are also called into question. Some believe that Blue Beam is tied to ancient civilizations or lost technologies, echoes of Atlantean or Lemurian knowledge re-emerging in modern form. Others claim that the theory links with CERN and the Large Hadron Collider, speculating that the experiment's manipulation of subatomic particles is part of a broader plan to open dimensional rifts through which synthetic realities or alternate entities can emerge. While there is no empirical support for these claims, they illustrate the expanding boundaries of Blue Beam's mythos, where conspiracy, mysticism, and pseudoscience merge. The most extreme versions of the theory portray Blue Beam as an apocalyptic threshold, a point of no return in the human story. In this view, the success of the operation would mark the end of true human agency, locking humanity into a digitally fabricated world ruled by hidden puppet masters. Spiritual liberation, then, is not just about resisting global government, but awakening to a higher frequency of truth that transcends both the physical and the virtual. Reality, according to these interpretations, is the final battleground, and Blue Beam is the weapon designed to seize it. While these ideas lie far outside mainstream discourse, they reveal the psychological depth of the theory. Blue Beam is no longer simply a question of whether NASA will fake an alien invasion. It has become a symbolic construct, a modern myth through which people attempt to reconcile their fears about technology, belief, and the unknown. As implausible as some claims may be, they resonate because they ask a question that science and politics rarely can. What if reality itself is not real? And what if someone, somewhere, already has the power to change it? Project Blue Beam may have begun as a fringe conspiracy, but over time it has evolved into something more expansive. A symbolic framework through which millions attempt to process their deepest fears about control, deception, and the very nature of reality. At its heart, the theory is not simply about NASA or satellites, holograms or staged invasions. It's about trust, specifically the erosion of trust in governments, institutions, technology, and even in one's own senses. In an age where misinformation spreads faster than facts, and where artificial intelligence can fabricate images, voices, and entire personas, the boundary between what is real and what is manipulated has never felt more fragile. Throughout this exploration, we've traced the theory from its origins with Sage Monast in the 1990s to its entrenchment in today's media and cultural psyche. We've examined the key claims: massive holograms simulating religious figures, satellite-based mind control systems, and a final staged alien invasion meant to unite the world under a single authoritarian regime. We've considered the real-world technologies that are often cited as proof, from HARP to microwave auditory devices, and we've explored the interpretations of critics, scientists, and skeptics who insist that such capabilities are not just exaggerated, they're physically and logistically unfeasible. Yet despite the lack of concrete evidence, the theory persists, not because it has been proven, but because it fulfills a psychological and cultural need. Project Blue Beam offers a coherent narrative in a time of confusion. It provides a villain in an era where the enemy often feels invisible. And most of all, it suggests that the forces shaping our world are neither accidental nor chaotic, but orchestrated, deliberate, and executed from above. The endurance of the theory is also a reflection of modern society's increasingly strained relationship with reality. With deepfakes, virtual reality, synthetic media, and algorithmically manipulated information dominating the public sphere, the tools required to blur truth and illusion already exist. Even if no global deception is actively being planned, the fear that it could be is no longer irrational. It's a natural consequence of a world where perception is easily manipulated, and authority often appears opaque, distant, and unaccountable. For some, Project Blue Beam represents a spiritual crisis, a fear that belief itself can be hijacked and weaponized. For others, it's a political metaphor, a warning about globalism, surveillance, and the consolidation of power through engineered catastrophe. And for a small but growing number, it is taken literally, a coded blueprint of a real plan unfolding in plain sight, hidden only by the absurdity of its own premise. What the theory ultimately reveals is not just a suspicion of technological advancement, but a deep-seated discomfort with how quickly society is changing and how little control the average person feels they have in shaping it. In that sense, Blue Beam is not just a conspiracy theory, it's a cultural response to rapid transformation, a modern myth that reflects real anxieties, even if the narrative itself remains unverified. Whether Project Blue Beam is a warning, a metaphor, or simply a fabrication, its resonance in today's world is undeniable. It lives on not because it's been proven, but because it taps into something elemental, our fear of being deceived, our need for meaning, and our unshakable suspicion that what we're being shown may not be the truth. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Conspiracy Theories and Cover-Ups. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to Conspiracy Theories Podcast on Spotify. Subscribe now.